So we're going to start with say and spell your first and last name.
Sure. So first name Ben, B-E-N, last name Popp, P-O-P-P.
Okay. And Ben, what is your title? What do you do for a living?
So I'm an investigative researcher with ADL's Center on Extremism.
Okay. And you are here today in Michigan presenting about your research as it relates to extremism in gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Help my viewers understand what you mean by gaming, because I think a lot of our viewers may not understand what that necessarily means.
Sure. So, what we're looking at is specifically white supremacist content in, when we say gaming, essentially online spaces where people are congregating. So these are things like Call of Duty, a lot of people are familiar with that, just other sort of online games where people are engaging in, social behavior. So, we're looking in those spaces for potential radicalizing or white supremacist content.
Okay. And again, because people don't necessarily know what white supremacy is and don't know what radicalization is, let's define those terms.
Sure. So, when we talk about white supremacy, we're usually talking about something very specific. So these are groups, movements, ideologies that specifically believe that white people are inherently superior and should therefore be in control of, when we say things like white nationalism, that means they should be in control of the country. White supremacy in general just means that they believe white people are supreme over other groups. And then in terms of radicalization, that's the process of people kind of slowly ingesting and taking on these ideologies.
Over the years, there have been stories that have broken out about sort of the toxic culture in gaming. It's sexist, it's homophobic, it's racist in a lot of instances. Is sort of the look for this white supremacist content an outgrowth of the natural sort of stew that's there? Are you just pulling one thread of other?
Exactly. So, yeah, obviously, all forms of hate and harassment are, something that should be addressed. But what we were kind of specifically interested was cutting through the sort of very loud, crowded spaces of that sort of generalized hate and harassment, and looking for these specific ideologies that are really dangerous and can lead to acts of violence and that sort of thing.
Okay. So, in your research, what have you found?
We monitor a ton of different online platforms, but in the platforms that I've specifically looked at, we found things from just references to white supremacist memes and other kind of like shared content in that way, all the way to pieces of Mein Kampf that gamers are sharing in their profiles, or profile pictures of mass shooters. So it's kind of this whole range of white supremacist content that just gets scarier and scarier as you dig deeper into it.
Okay. So I'm mom and dad. My kids are doing Call of Duty or any of the other multiple player games where you're interacting with people around the world, really. What is your recommendation to them to help their kids navigate this landscape where the bigot is reaching into your home, essentially?
Yeah, I think, what I can say is thankfully, while I personally haven't spent a lot of time within the actual games themselves looking for this kind of content, because a lot of that, disappears as it happens, when people are voice chatting and that kind of thing. It doesn't, there's no like permanence there. But it seems to be, less frequent in those spaces and more frequent in these kind of gaming adjacent spaces. So when we say that, we're talking about places outside of the actual game where people are communicating. So platforms like Discord and Twitch streams, that kind of thing. Those are the spaces where people can interact a little bit deeper than just someone talking in a game lobby. But in terms of having young people be aware of this kind of thing, there's this sort of theory called inoculation of digging into things like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, other kinds of really blatantly false information with people before they're exposed to those ideologies, so that they can understand what to look for, because it's a lot easier to get there in the beginning than to sort of like de-radicalize someone after they've invested a lot of time and energy into these ideologies. So that's one way, is just education, making people aware that this is a problem, and showing them what examples of this ideology can look like, so that they know how to avoid it in the future.
How widespread of a problem is it?
I think, thankfully, the really extreme stuff is pretty small. I mean, it's still there, which is why it's worth us investigating. But in terms of like the actual, hate and harassment more generally, a lot of gamers report that they experience that. Unfortunately, many gamers also have said that they don't report those to the platform because they feel that that's kind of part of the gaming culture. So obviously there needs to be a shift there in understanding that this shouldn't be tolerated. But yeah, I would say that's a much more large problem than the really extreme white supremacist stuff that we found. There's a lot of it, but just because there's a lot of content on the internet. But thankfully it's not mainstream. It's still very fringe.
So this is kind of a canary in a coal mine, in some way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A warning of what is to come.
Exactly.
And how, when we talk about radicalization of somebody, I mean, I think it's the internet. People say bad things to each other and move on, but that's not the case when we talk about radicalization of white supremacy and hate, is it?
Yeah. So, because in just being harassed in a multiplayer game, I get harassed a lot for just not being good at some games, and it makes me mad in the moment. But that's different than engaging in some of these communities where people are kind of constantly getting bombarded with these ideologies for the purpose of radicalizing people. Our Center for Technology and Society did a study that found that of the people in 2023 that reported that they had experienced white supremacist ideology online, over half of them said that it was on a monthly basis or more than that. So that just shows that people are getting this message over and over again, which becomes the problem because that's how people can be radicalized.
And have we connected sort of this online radicalization yet to any real world activities?
In terms of the research that I've done in gaming, there are very extreme cases where that happens. One of the examples, very recently, an individual had been posting on a gaming platform talking about wanting to commit a violent act and how they were a white supremacist, and they shared a bunch of anti-Semitic memes and that kind of thing on this gaming platform. And then that individual actually attacked a mosque in Turkey and tried to stab people. Thankfully, no one was killed, but it just shows that people posting this content can radicalize others and also commit acts of violence themselves.
And so if somebody is on one of these platforms and sees that call for violence, that they're going to commit this act of violence, what are the next steps? Because obviously it's in the online world, but it can have real world impact. So what do you recommend are the next steps that somebody should take?
Yeah, report to the platform, report to organizations like ADL, because we have connections to law enforcement. We can make sure that gets to the right people. But yeah, as I said, a lot of people just kind of take this as part and parcel of the internet and don't report these kind of things.
Okay. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think is really important as it comes to radicalization and online gaming as it's beginning to develop?
Not that I can think of right now. Sorry, my brain's a little tired. So.
Sorry.